Howdy folks, welcome to the Daily Coin, and today is Friday, June the 3rd, 2016, and it makes my heart sing to have Mr. Jeff Nielson, returning guest to the Daily Coin, and he's coming to us from Canada, and his website is bullionbullscanada.com. Jeff, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. It's always fun to have a chat.
It is. And back on March the 24th of this year, you and I did a show, and it was Silver Rally, Economic Collapse, and Donald Trump, and we covered, obviously, the gamut. And during that show, you were talking about a fake silver rally, and I think that may have been when you were just developing this idea of the crash, or not crash, but this correction that we are seeing right now with gold and silver. And if you would refresh people's memory on that, as well as how you came to that conclusion, and congratulations on making such a great call.
Well, thanks, Rory. And actually, I was checking back in my own records just to be clear on the dates myself. And it was actually almost 4 months ago that I started, pulling the rug out from under the people who were talking about this rally, because there was just no reason to believe it was going to happen. And I came up with several reasons for it. Of course, the main reason, the most obvious reason, was that the price of silver was lagging the price of gold. And even if we had normal, legitimate markets with bullion at rational prices, that can't happen. The silver market is much smaller than the gold market. If precious metals rallies, silver has to go up higher because it takes a much smaller fraction of capital to drive the price higher. And of course, in the real world, in the physical market, we see investors rather purchasing silver at close to a 50-to-1 ratio versus gold. So what that means is that even with the ridiculous price ratio between gold and silver, that roughly proportionate amounts of money are going into both metals. And then, of course, we see this so-called rally, quote unquote, in the bankers' paper markets, where gold is actually leading the way. And I, explained to people in numerical terms what that represented. It meant that, supposedly less than 1.5% of all the money going into the sector was going into silver. And of course, that was just a ludicrous position to take for anybody. And, if other commentators would have spent some time crunching the numbers, I'm sure they would have reached a similar conclusion. But, instead they were only too happy to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, started by the mainstream media. They're the ones that came out shortly after the new year, as soon as precious metals prices, the price of gold went up a little, and said, "Oh, well, we have a new rally." And all the other commentators jumped on the bandwagon. And, I really, it disappoints me, because we know these people are compulsive liars. And of course, when they say bad things about precious metals, myself and other commentators point to, it being ridiculous drivel and unfounded propaganda. But yet, the moment these people say what we want to hear, then all of a sudden, most of the people who report on this sector are quite happy to go right along with these people. And, the thing is, you just, of course, had John Embry on recently to point out how our financial markets are poised for the next collapse, which could come at any time. And so, I mean, this is the point. I know that most of these other commentators don't listen to Jeff Nielson, and I've been writing about the next crash coming for about 16 months now. But, when John Embry says it, you would think these other commentators would listen and think, if there's going to be another crash in financial markets in the next week, or maybe a month from now, or a couple months down the road, are precious metals really going to be allowed to rally while this is happening? Well, of course not.
Nope, not ever. It just is not going to happen.
Not until they completely lose control of the markets, through generally, most likely, some sort of default event for gold or silver or both. And of course, we've seen no indication at all that they're losing control of these markets. Things are managed just as tightly as they have been throughout the last 5+ years. And so this is another reason to just treat this as a script rather than any sort of a legitimate move.
Well, it's all the script. I mean, from my perspective, and it always concerns me, Jeff, whenever I hear, that J.P. Morgan is calling for a new gold bull market, or Bloomberg has some kind of headline about gold going higher. That's always a concern to me because, like you've pointed out just now and forever, that you know it's not in their best interest. So I always take those kind of headlines with a grain of salt because that tells me that something is out of balance because that's not their job. Their job is to bash gold and to beat gold because it is the number one threat to their system, period.
It's the canary in the coal mine. And
Exactly.
I still see comments from readers suggesting that, oh, well, the bankers are holding all the gold as well, and they're in control of that as well. But it simply can't be. I mean, this is the whole point of this paradigm: is the banking crime syndicate had to make a choice between basing their empire on their fraudulent paper markets or basing their empire on legitimate money, which means gold and silver. And they made their choice. They went for paper. And of course, we've seen for decades them using their bullion to dump onto the markets and suppress prices. Well, you can't be dumping your bullion and hoarding your bullion at the same time. These are
Right.
mutually exclusive acts. So, this is the whole thing. It's perfectly uh, natural and proper for people to be totally suspicious of all of our markets and secret agendas. But the one thing that can't be happening is for this crime syndicate to be both long on paper and long on bullion, because you have to go one way or the other.
Exactly. And you said that, and I agree that the criminal banking cabal had to make a choice between fraudulent paper or gold, and their choice was to go with fraudulent paper. And what we're seeing, and what you and I both, and quite a few other people report on a regular basis, is the fact that gold has been flowing west to east for quite some time. And do you see that the East is making that same choice, that they're moving away from fraudulent paper and back towards real money called gold? I mean,
Well,
is that what we're witnessing?
Well, with respect to China and Russia in particular, I've been on the record on several occasions of speaking of these nations as acting more like chess players than what we typically see in the West with, the psychopathic bully mentality that our own governments continually reflect. And so China and Russia can see what's happening over the long term. That the bankers have taken their paper fraud to ridiculous extremes, ridiculous and totally unsustainable extremes. Like the whole Ponzi scheme of fiat currencies and fractional reserve banking. It's hopelessly unsustainable. It's a system that must implode. And
Yes,
so we've had this system in place for a long time. And what we've seen in the last decade or so in particular is the bankers ramp up the level of frauds to insane extremes. So we know that they know that their system is nearing the end. And so this last big blowout, rape of the system. And so, of course, they can see this in China and Russia. And so they know the current paper system is coming to an end. They don't want to be the victims in the next system that rises up out of the ashes. So what they've been doing is, as you say, looking to lock up control of as much of the global bullion supplies as possible, as just a basic reflection of the golden rule, which is he who has the gold makes the rules. And
exactly.
so when we see a new system rise up out of the ashes, hopefully it will be an Eastern dominated system based on legitimate money, because that's certainly their plan. And of course, these psychopathic bankers have been destroying their own power base in the West. Our economies have been bankrupted. So it's really hard to see how they can seize control of the next paradigm that's going to replace this current paradigm when they've destroyed their own foundation.
And destroy it they have. I mean, it is mind-boggling. I mean, just this morning, as fraudulent and corrupt as the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers are, they only reported 38,000 new jobs being created in May. I mean, that's nothing. That is literally close to zero as far as a jobs market in an economy the size of the United States. But even that is a direct reflection of just how bad everything is. And I'm not sure why they would put that number out unless unless it's a benefit to something that I'm unaware of at this point.
Well, in fact, it's incredibly convenient because
Well, yes.
once again we've had the liars at the Federal Reserve talking about raising interest rates. This time we're going to have another rate hike. This time for sure, Janet Yellen's absolutely committed to raising interest rates in June. We've heard that over and over again for the last few weeks, which has been the precise reason which went from gold has been taken down from 1,300 back to 1,200, and the precise reason that silver was taken down from close to $18 back to under $16, because Janet Yellen's definitely going to raise interest rates in June. So you get the puppets at the Bureau of Labor Statistics being ordered to produce a bad jobs report for June. And then, of course, Janet Yellen has her perfect excuse not to raise precious metals. And I mean, within a couple of hours of this phony jobs report being released, we have headlines like June rate hike off the table, July uncertain from Kitco, and then from Bloomberg, weak U.S. jobs report pulls rug from under June Fed rate hike. Yes, pulled the rug out from under it, like they really wanted to raise interest rates. I mean, this is what is so ludicrous. These liars have been talking about raising interest rates for 8 years. And of course, back when they first started talking about it at the end of 2008, it wasn't just some tiny token 0.25% rate hike here and there. They promised to fully normalize interest rates after they had taken them down to this ridiculous near zero level, which we've never seen before in our history. It's only been tried in Japan and it failed. And of course, back in 2008, we had all of these liars saying to us over and over again, we will never copy Japan. We see that Japan has tried something that's failed. It's ridiculous. We'll never do it. And then they've spent 8 years copying Japan precisely. And then, of course, I put out a commentary a few months ago noting how that the corporate media has now acknowledged that they've copied Japan. So, I mean, this is how deceitful these liars are. Is they pledge something that they absolutely will never do, they say, and then they do. That's exactly what they, in fact, perpetrate.
Exactly. I mean, I tell my friends, my family all the time that if you listen to what they say and you go 180 degrees from what they've said, you're going to be a lot closer to the truth. So if they say they're not going to copy Japan, that means we're going to copy Japan to the letter, which is exactly what they've done, which means that the next step is to take us to negative interest rates because that's where Japan is right now. Or do you think that that's off the table? Or is that part of the whole cashless society, which is what I believe is all
Well,
about?
yes. I mean, it's part of the whole paradigm of rape. You go cashless to force people to put all of their paper wealth into these institutions of crime, and then you impose negative interest rates so they steadily steal a percentage of everything that's being held. And of course, this is on top of the systemic theft of inflation, which of course these liars pretend does not exist. Inflation is a permanent tax on all of us, and now they're going to add a new tax in the form of negative interest rates, and of course this also plays into what I've been talking about in terms of the next crash, and John Embry is saying in terms of a financial crash is coming. What do you generally see when a financial crash happens? You see bond prices move upward. Well, bond prices and interest rates are totally inverse to each other. Most of your audience should be aware of that. So if bond prices are going up, that means interest rates are going even lower, and they're already at zero. So of course that means negative. So the financial crash that is being manufactured could very likely be the pretext for rates not just going a little bit negative, but going to say minus 2% or minus 3%, so that there is a real painful bite on people's wealth. And then, of course, they'll invent all of these ridiculous excuses why they need to keep the interest rates at minus 2% or minus 3% or maybe minus 5% to quote unquote stimulate our economies. Yes, you really stimulate economies by slapping another tax on everybody, on all of their wealth. So I mean, this, there could never ever be a legitimate financial or economic reason for negative interest rates. This is an open act of theft of private property, borrowers stealing from lenders or savers. And so anytime people see the words negative interest rates, it's just a euphemism for crime. There's no such thing as negative interest rates in the world of rational economies. It's a fictional gibberish phrase that's been made up. Negative interest rates could never exist in any rational economic scenario.
Never under any rational, being the key word, economic scenario. We're not living in rational economic times, and which is why we have to take measures to protect ourselves by owning, possessing physical gold and silver, period. Those are two of the only, not saying that they are the only, but they're two of the best. 5,000 year history doesn't lie, to protect yourself. So, say that we do go to a cashless society, and I've asked this of several people, and I may have asked it of you, Jeff, but if I haven't, I apologize for repeating myself. If we do go to a cashless society, what kind of impact would you see that having on gold and silver? I mean, would that just become a completely black market, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, if, or I should say when, the ban on cash comes through our system, that will be a wake-up call to a lot of people. And they'll start to understand that this economic fascism is a weapon being used against them. And we would expect to see significant numbers of people at that time finally realizing they need to get out of paper and get into physical assets and get into real money. So, I mean, there would be an enormous incentive for people to move from paper to physical bullion when this ban on cash becomes an official reality. And so it's precisely for this reason that I've been on the record now for well over a year as saying, look out for bullion confiscation. Just like I was pointing out a few minutes ago how the bankers would never allow their paper bullion markets to rally when all of their paper financial markets were crashing. This same crime syndicate is not going to allow a population to move from paper into metal when they've just come up with this paradigm of crime to rape them with negative interest rates and a ban on cash. So we should expect that when the ban on cash occurs, that very likely it's going to be followed by some sort of bullion confiscation event. And so this is why people need to be thinking about either perhaps moving wealth outside of our system into some foreign jurisdiction, or they need to be thinking about what they're going to do when this bullion confiscation comes, and whether they're going to be forced into civil disobedience, into hiding their bullion from the fascist tax collectors that are trying to steal their wealth, and of course the one reason why we might not see bullion confiscation occur is that this would force a number of people to go into the black market economy. And, as bad as it is for us to have to try to operate in a black market system, the bankers don't like it either because they don't have control over black markets. By definition, they control all the official paper markets. They don't control the black markets. And so they may be reluctant to engage in a series of steps which will ultimately force a large percentage of the well, maybe not a large percentage, but a significant percentage of the population to go black market for their commerce, because that creates additional problems for them. On the other hand, these are basically psychopaths, and they often don't think through the consequences of their own schemes. So, we may see them, already committed to ban on cash, bullion confiscation. Now we've got them all trapped. And then, of course, a lot of people flee into black markets, and so, there's various permutations that people can work through, but it's really important to think these things through step by step and not just be reacting as events occur, which seems to be what's happening with a lot of other commentators.
Well, it seems to be, and I think that these commentators are a direct reflection of a majority of the people that are awake and aware. I mean, because there seems to be a lot of reacting instead of responding, and which are two completely different things. I mean,
well,
like
yeah,
you said,
and
you
it
have
goes
to.
back. Sorry, it goes back to the distinction between psychopaths and chess players. The psychopaths, react and uh, simply seek to do whatever expedient in that particular day. And the chess players, of course, try to be a couple steps ahead. And so as you talk, they respond when things occur because it's not a surprise to them like it is to so many people. And you see, this is of course why I think it's so important to warn people that this is a fake rally. The price is going to be have been taken up. They're going to be marched back down again. It's important that people are aware this is coming so that they don't get surprised by it. Because it's when surprises like that occur that people do silly things like maybe get the urge to bail out of their bullion. They were told, oh yeah, here's the new rally, it's coming, and then prices suddenly reverse and go lower, and it shakes their confidence. This is what I'm trying to prevent from happening with people, because after this next takedown in precious metals, then we have a real possibility of seeing a real rally, because that's exactly what we saw after the crash of '08. The crash of '08 created a real firm bottom in precious metals markets, and then the bankers really couldn't prevent the rally of 2009 from beginning. And so, this is a very real possibility this time around as well, assuming that the system just doesn't implode completely, that we'll see an economic crash, precious metals prices taken down to some rock bottom level from which they can't go any lower. That sets the stage for the next rally, early next year or perhaps a little bit later than that.
Now, do you see the lows of last December? Do you see it going back down there to $12, $11.50 or whatever it hit? I mean, it was down, it was
Well,
way down there, a lot further than where we're at right now.
Well, and of course, we know it's going to go down a significant percent. We know that all the gains are going to be given up. I mean, this is the whole point of me saying fake rally. All of
Okay.
this positive movement is going to be reversed. As far as how low the final low will be, well, I don't have a crystal ball, and unfortunately, the bankers won't send me a copy of their script. So, I don't have much more to go by than what other people see. But I listen to the liars themselves for clues.
Yes.
And what is the one clue we've been hearing over and over again for 4 or 5 years now? It's Goldman Sachs calling for $1,000 an ounce gold. That's something that they spit it out and then they'll back away from it a bit and spit it out again. But it's the one gold bashing lie that it's been repeated on a number of occasions over these past several years. So if you're looking for some rock bottom price for gold, they could be $1,000 an ounce. So of course, when it occurs, Goldman Sachs can puff up their chest and say, look, we were right all along. Well, yes, of course, if you're holding a copy of the script, it's pretty easy to be correct. And of course, for silver, if gold is taken down to $1,000, we could conceivably see a single digit price for silver again. Because, of course, just like silver is supposed to move higher at a lot faster rate when the markets are moving higher, it's supposed to move downward at a faster rate when the markets go lower. So whatever percentage we see gold decline, we will likely see silver decline by a greater extent, because that's what's supposed to happen when the markets move in these directions. So we could see single-digit price for silver again. It's not out of the question.
But at that
the
point,
thing there, that there has to be a caveat added there, that we could see these ridiculous rock bottom paper prices in the bankers' official paper markets, but there's no bullion to be found in the retail chain at all, no physical bullion at these ridiculous prices. You'll see so-called premiums of 30% or 40% or 50% off of these ridiculous paper prices, or simply no inventory at all available in the retail chain, and people will have to look to try to buy at an auction or find some other more direct source. So, it does people no good to wait for these rock bottom prices and think they're going to be a buying opportunity if there's not 1 ounce of bullion to be found at those ridiculous phony prices.
yeah, I mean which was what I was going to say. I mean, if it revisits even a $12 handle for silver, if silver gets down to $12 and change, I would think that there would be literally an explosion of buying at this point, and it would absolutely choke the market, just maybe even worse than what we saw last year. I'm not saying that it would be, but I would say that the odds are pretty high of that happening, where there's no metal available for 5 weeks and premiums are going, through the roof, 30, 40, 50% or even more. I mean, I just, man, that could get ugly quick. And yes, I agree 100% that if metal prices go down, a lot from what you're describing. I mean, if we get down to a single digit, you would never see that. You would still see, say the spot on silver is 950 an ounce. I guarantee you wouldn't be able to find an eagle for less than $20. That's just my guess.
Well, and Rory, look what happens if we start putting these various puzzle pieces together. So we know that the bankers want to impose a ban on cash.
Yep.
We think that they're taking us to some sort of bullion implosion point in terms of inventories with the crash in bullion prices that seems to also be in the cards. And so what happens when that final inventory crash occurs? And there is some sort of formal default event in bullion markets. What do you think the mainstream media is going to say? Are they going to say, oh, gee, it's the big banks' fault for underpricing these metals by ridiculous amounts year after year, decade after decade? No. What they're going to do is they're going to point to ordinary people like you and me, and they're going to say, look, it's those silver investors that are responsible for the default in the silver market. They've been hoarding, quote unquote, all this silver, and that's why there's been this collapse in the silver market. It's not the 30 years of radical underpricing that's caused us to burn through billions of ounces of inventory. It's going to be the last few months of buying from the silver investors that's supposedly totally responsible for this evil of the silver market imploding. And of course, after they blame the silver investors for quote unquote their hoarding, how easy is it going to be for them to say, well, you know what? We're going to have to confiscate their silver.
We're going to have to call it all in because those silver terrorists, you got to get that word in there. They're silver terrorists. They're gold terrorists. They have wrecked our markets. Yeah, I could easily see that headline.
And you see, this is also why I was so totally against it when, several years ago, Max Kaiser came out with his, let's buy silver and take down JP Morgan rhetoric. I pointed to that and I said, look, if the mainstream media chose to hype that and then, point to us and say, look, we're trying to take down the U.S. financial system by buying silver. How easy would it be for them to demonize us and use that as a justification for bullion confiscation? So, this is why I've always been totally against any sort of aggressive, radical rhetoric of that nature, because that doesn't represent us at all. We're not the aggressors here. We're not the threats to the financial system. We're simply ordinary people trying to protect ourselves from a system that we know is going to implode. And for 5,000 years, the best way to protect yourself is to move your wealth into physical bullion. So this is the whole thing. We're playing defense, and this is the mantra that people need to keep on their lips at all times. Because if people continually talk about playing defense and protecting themselves instead of acting in an aggressive manner, it becomes a lot harder for these liars to demonize us and to justify any sort of bullion confiscation event.
Well, seeing that, and I'm not sure that confiscation would be the first order of business for them. I think that what would happen is that there would be a massive tax put on it, and that tax would come, directly from the dealers, the authorized purchasers of silver eagles. It would be imposed on them, and then it would just trickle down through the system from there. And I think that would be the first thing, the first step, because then you're going to have a shutdown, and then if there's something that comes back in to the system from a retail investor like yourself or myself, then there's your first, that would be the confiscation, if you will.
Well, Rory, I would point to that and say, well, look, if there was a massive tax imposed on bullion, that's the same sort of dramatic push for people to go black market that you would have with a bullion confiscation event. You'd have something so oppressive that people would simply say, no, I'm not going to cooperate with this illegitimate system any longer. I'm going to go outside the system and conduct my commerce outside the system. So, and of course, the example there is India.
Yeah.
They tried, the government tried to impose this tiny little surtax on bullion, and there was immediately a 1 week strike by all of India's jewelers because the Indian gold buyers in particular are extremely price sensitive, and the jewelers knew that if they imposed even this 1% surtax on the precious metals market, that a large percentage of their clientele would go black market and they would lose business. So, that's an extreme example because they're extremely sensitive to changes in bullion prices. But if we start talking about quote unquote massive taxes here on bullion, then we could see the same mentality take hold in North America as well.
How do you see a confiscation event playing out? I mean, do you see people going door to door? I mean, that's the reason I was uh, moving towards more of a tax or some other form other than somebody going door to door, because is that realistic? Is that worth it? I mean, is there enough metal out there for that to happen? I mean, because when I hear the word confiscation, I I envision someone taking something from me physically.
Well, there's two forms of confiscation scenarios, and I've discussed this in the past on quite a number of occasions. Let's call one of the scenarios confiscation light. And in the confiscation light scenario, what happens is there is an official decree of confiscation that's passed by our governments and imposed upon markets. And of course, the moment that becomes the law, every ounce of bullion that's held in any sort of bullion fund or bullion account gets snatched up because that's gold and silver that is out of our direct physical custody. It's in the custody of financial entities that are going to feel compelled to obey the law and to relinquish any bullion that they have custody over. And so, because this, and of course, look at how we've been herded to try to get our bullion investment into funds and accounts. That's been a constant theme in the mainstream media, and there are these inventories of gold and silver in these bullion ETFs that actually exist. Of course, they're in the custody of the bankers, so it's really their bullion, but there is bullion in the system that can be seized and taken from its legal title holders and transferred to the control of our government. So that would be the first stage, of course, is the immediate seizure of everything that's in funds and accounts. And then because there is an official decree of bullion confiscation, a considerable percentage of the population will, in fact, kowtow to the law and surrender their bullion. So if you take the amount of bullion that people would actually surrender, and you take the amount that they can seize from accounts and funds, that's a significant quantity of bullion, even in North America. So that's the confiscation light scenario. And I would suggest that's the more likely confiscation scenario. The less likely confiscation scenario is hardcore confiscation. What you're talking about, people, the sending their Nazis door to door and kicking in doors and punching holes in walls looking for our bullion. And that, of course, could very easily backfire on them. And that's why I understand you not, thinking that being likely. Although, of course, we can't rule out any sort of authoritarianism any longer with the way that we've seen this increasing level of fascism in our societies. But I personally believe that the bullion light scenario is much more likely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And as far as what's being held in within the banking system now, companies that are outside of the banking system, I don't know that they would feel compelled to do any, to kowtow to this request or mandate or law or whatever to turn in their bullion, that they're holding in an allocated account for someone. I don't see that happening, And as far as the bigger companies have offshored all their holdings anyway. They're not even here in the United States, so they certainly wouldn't have to do anything.
Well, for me, I'm a big picture guy, so I spend most of my time looking at the larger trends, and so I'm not as much of a day-to-day person in terms of the anecdotal bits and pieces of news that come upon us. So for me, the dominant stories are the fake rally and the next crash that is coming, and the various permutations of these two events that we're going to see when the script unfolds in a more obvious manner. So maybe you have other topics that are of particular interest to yourself, but like I said, I'm somewhat focused on those two particular areas myself at this point.
I think we've given them quite a bit for now, and I think we should pick it up in a few weeks and see where we're at, and see how this rally, or this fake rally, is unfolding, and confirm what you've presented, because so far you've been spot on, and that it's going to continue along the same lines that you're saying that it is.
Well, the one thing that I should add that just hit me is that there should be a crash in our financial markets. They're clearly teetering. The U.S. markets, particularly, are clearly rolled over. We should be hoping that the next crash comes upon us in the next few weeks, because that fits the U.S. election cycle of blaming the outgoing regime for the crash, and then pretending the next party coming in are the white knights. Because if we don't see a next crash in the next few weeks, then it no longer fits the previous pattern of these 8-year bubble and crash cycles. It's no longer tied into the U.S. election cycle, and then we need to worry, because if they can't blame the next crash on economic causes because it would be politically inconvenient, that means that they're going to have to manufacture some exogenous event as a pretext for the next crash. And that is a scenario that really scares me, because when we use the phrase exogenous event, quote unquote, most likely it means another manufactured war, possibly even some sort of manufactured plague, something that can't be pinned on the political puppets, but yet is a pretext for a financial crash. And so personally, I would much prefer to see the next scheduled crash in our markets occur from economic causes rather than from quote unquote exogenous events.
Well, your timeline fits with what several people, including John Embry, have said. We're not going to make it to the election. So
I hope we're right.
Yes. Well, given what you've just spelled out, I hope you're right as well. Well, Jeff, we've been speaking with Mr. Jeff Nielson, and you can find all of Jeff's great work over at bullionbullscanada.com, and he also writes for sprottmoney.com. Jeff, I certainly appreciate all your time, all your wisdom, and I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, my friend.
My pleasure, and the same to yourself and all of your audience.
We will talk with you soon.
Sounds great.